The Regional Taxi Authority came about as a function of an effort for the city to deal with the issue of an oversaturated market. So essentially what we found by doing an inventory of the number of cab companies and drivers in East Lansing is that there are just too many, and our ordinance actually requires that we consider the impact on wages of having too many taxi cab companies licensed. In past years, the City Council has not wanted to do anything about that, and they've sort of taken the approach that the free market could address the number of cabs, but that hasn't been the case. So what the City Council did was enact a moratorium on having any new companies or new drivers driving in the city, effective for about a year. So in the interim, we could start to find some solutions to deal with this issue. So one of those solutions is to create the Greater Lansing Taxi Authority, as I like to jokingly call it, GLITA. So we think that this will be beneficial not just for the municipalities who are involved, but for the drivers as well. So essentially what initially this means is that Lansing and East Lansing are partnering to create this authority for the region. It's the first one and the only one that we know of in the state. We will be, through the East Lansing City Clerk's office, administering that authority. So it will actually have an appointed board that I will be, per our agreement, I will be the secretary to that board. We will administer all the applications and that whole process. So the good thing for the taxi drivers is that they can all come through East Lansing. They don't have to get licensed separately in Lansing and then again in East Lansing. One license will allow them to drive throughout the region. So that's going to be nice for them. It's going to be a one-stop shop for the taxi drivers. For us, it means that we can improve the standards, hopefully improve the experience for the ridership. We can ask that vehicles be metered and so on. So it's kind of a quid pro quo here. But ultimately our main concern is always the safety of the public. So we make sure that they're licensed, they've had a drug test, we check their criminal background history, especially in East Lansing where you have people that are driving around young ladies. So we want to make sure that, that we've done our due diligence. So. The interesting thing is when the council enacted the moratorium, Uber and Lyft were not even in the picture. So that just sort of is an interesting component to throw into the mix. So yeah, there are some issues here because they're technically called a TNC, a Transportation Network Company, and so they don't fall under our ordinances as a city. So we can't regulate whether or not they have a background check, their vehicle's been inspected, and that kind of thing. So we had initially gotten an agreement from Uber to have them pay us a certain fee as a regional authority, and then of course they've agreed to fairly stringent background checks and so on. But just as recently as last week, and you're getting this first, there's been legislation introduced by a Republican lawmaker to prevent local communities from in any way regulating these companies. And I understand that the companies don't want to deal with a whole bunch of different communities. They really just want to deal with one statewide regulatory scheme. However, they had promised us revenue, and so now that's going to the state. And so it was actually a very heated, almost hostile meeting that we had with the chief of staff of the rep last week. And so what we're trying to do now is to include in that legislation where if there's a certain population threshold or an authority created like ours, that we do have the ability to regulate at the local level. So that's kind of a to be continued. We are getting tons of complaints from the taxi cab drivers about Uber. We have cited Uber drivers because they are pulling up to taxi stands where they are, which in effect means they're operating as a taxi without a permit. They are also impeding traffic, or they're sitting in parking lots of other businesses. So it's our position that if Uber and Lyft are operating the way they're supposed to be operating, we won't know that they're there. Except for Lyft, they have the big pink mustaches on the front of the car. But
Yeah.
so it's definitely made things complicated for us. We appreciate the convenience of Uber, but we're still trying to wrap our arms around what the impact is going to be regionally. So there's definitely a push-pull at this point between local government and the legislature on this issue.
Yeah, I was reading some articles that said people complained in Uber about like being sexually harassed by some of the cabs. Have we got any complaints around here like that?
Haven't gotten any complaints about any sexual harassment issues in an Uber vehicle. But the tough thing is that even if they complain to us, I guess we can process it as a police report, but we don't have the ability to take away that person's permit as we would with a cab. So it definitely strips away a layer of regulation that we would like to have, simply because of the safety issue. It's not even really about the revenue, but we would like to make sure that anyone who's driving around possibly intoxicated 18-year-old young lady has been thoroughly vetted in terms of their criminal background history. So,
Right. And if you know anything, could you like maybe tell me about Uber? If you know anything about the company?
I know that I just read an article in Vanity Fair about it yesterday, so I know that it's definitely more than $1 billion company at this point. The goal of the owner is to be in every major city in the world. He has encountered resistance from states that basically want to operate without being regulated in any way, shape, or form. So he's running into issues in that regard. I have heard on good authority that they have, they're very, how shall I say this? They've donated a lot of money to Republican causes and candidates in order to ensure that they are not regulated, that this is a free market type of thing, and so it's controversial, I would say, to say the least. So to be continued. And they're also trying to branch out into doing other services such as delivering food and things like that. So it's a pretty interesting concept. Yeah.
Do you have any idea like when it's going to start taking effect, the taxi authority, like when you'll have?
Sure. Yep. So the taxi authority, now that the election is over, I'm anticipating hopefully convening the first meeting of the taxi authority sometime at the beginning of next year. I would like to, at this point, to see an end to the moratorium on new drivers and new companies. It's been tough on some companies, and they haven't been able to add vehicles to existing fleets. So I would like to get that underway as quickly as possible so that we can lift the moratorium and start operating as a region in the way that we've agreed to do. We'd also like to expand the authority to include the 4 townships that are really right outside of Lansing and East Lansing, so that would include Meridian, Delhi, Delta, and Lansing Township. So we'd like to see that happen.
Okay, I think that's all I really have to ask. So anything else you'd like to tell me about it, or if you can think of that be useful to the article?
Can't really think of anything other than that. It's, we're very excited about it. We hope that we're also working with the capital area, Lansing Capital Area Regional or International Airport, to work with them on licensing drivers to pick up. They can drop off currently at the airport, but they can't pick up. So we're hoping to include them in this authority, and we're hoping it's a good thing for the drivers and for consumers who like to use taxi cabs.